Again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much, and we'll speak to you very soon and probably see you again very soon. Thank you very much, Vladimir.
Next time in Moscow.
Oh, that's an interesting one. I don't know. I'll get a little heat on that one, but I could see it possibly happening. Thank you very much, Vladimir. And thank you all. Thank you.
That's it for the historic face-to-face meeting between Presidents Trump and Putin. There was no deal on Ukraine, either a big one to end the conflict or a temporary ceasefire to halt it for a bit. But the atmosphere between the two men seemed really, well, quite jolly. So what can we take away from this meeting, which seems like a bit of an anticlimax? We will discuss the implications on this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast, where I'll also be joined by some of the BBC's other top podcasters. Hello, it's Adam in the studio.
It's Victoria in the studio.
It's Vitaly in Anchorage.
And it's Sarah, right beside Vitaly here in Anchorage, Alaska.
Right, let's kick off this mega co-production of Newscast, Ukrainecast and Americast. All the casts, and it is 11 minutes past 6 in the UK, where me and Victoria are. Sarah, what's the time? I've lost track of the time difference now.
It's just past 9 o'clock on Friday evening, so it's not just a different time, it's a different day for us, Adam.
Okay, right, just to add to the confusion. So we had the chronology of Putin arriving, and we'll talk about that and the symbolism of that, because that was like a very visual story with a lot of kind of geopolitical implications. Then we had the meeting between the two delegations. That ended up being slightly different from how we had expected it to be. And then just a little while ago, we had this news conference between the two principals, as you'd call them, Trump and Putin. Although, Sarah, to call it a news conference is a bit of an exaggeration, isn't it?
Well, because that suggests that the journalists who were in the room would get a chance to ask questions. That's the traditional form of a press conference. Whereas what happened was we got statements from both of the leaders and then they scurried off the stage before we had a chance to ask them anything. So maybe we should call it a joint statement rather than a news conference.
And Vic, think about it. The number of times we've watched Donald Trump, the number of times he's just turned up to a podium, said some words, and then gone without then answering questions for an hour or 2 hours on every subject. It's unusual, isn't it?
Has it happened since he's come back into the White House for a second time? I can't think of an occasion. He normally loves those press conferences. He talks and talks and talks. He will take as many questions as the assembled members of the press want to throw at him. It was extraordinary, and presumably that's what President Putin wanted. No questions from reporters. And that's what he got. And in Vitaly and Sarah, in terms of what we learned for people who are just tuning in and trying to find out what happened at this summit, is there anything to tell our listeners around the world?
No deal, no ceasefire. Well, bottom line is things stand as they did yesterday, which is kind of what Vladimir Putin wanted. I think he's going home happy. Donald Trump wanted a ceasefire. That didn't happen. For Ukraine, well, the worst case scenario seems to have been avoided, a scenario in which Donald Trump would have offered Russia Ukrainian territory in exchange for a promise of a ceasefire or a peace deal. That didn't happen either, but uncertainty prevails.
Yeah, no deal and no ceasefire, Vitaly. The bizarre thing is there also seems to be no hard feelings about that. I would have thought that Donald Trump would be very disappointed, even possibly angry, about leaving this summit empty-handed. And we can talk about this at greater length, but he seems to be reasonably happy. Certainly that's his outward countenance. So we should delve into how on earth that can be.
So you know what? Let's dive into just what happened at that news conference or those press statements. Let's play you a nice chunky clip of what Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, had to say. And this is him speaking through an interpreter because he spoke in Russian for most of the.
And he spoke first as well.
Yes.
The situation in Ukraine has to do with fundamental threats to our security. Moreover, we've always considered the Ukrainian nation, and I've said it multiple times, a brotherly nation, however strange it may sound in these conditions. We have the same roots, and everything that's happening is a tragedy for us and terrible wound. Therefore, the country is sincerely interested in putting an end to it. At the same time, we're convinced that in order to make the settlement lasting and long-term, we need to eliminate all the primary roots, the primary causes of that conflict, and we've said it multiple times, to consider all legitimate concerns of Russia and to reinstate a just balance of security in Europe and in the world on the whole.
And Vitaly, that phrase, primary causes, listeners of Ukrainecast know it well. The root causes, according to President Putin, must be eliminated. Just remind our listeners around the world what he believes, what Vladimir Putin believes those root causes are.
Well, that was the most important thing he said at that news conference, I thought, or in that statement. Root causes, translated from Kremlin speak, means the original reasons why he started his special military operation against Ukraine. And those reasons are focused on destroying Ukraine as an independent nation. So what he was saying there is essentially, look, I'm still determined to keep on doing what I have been doing in Ukraine for 3.5 years, and you're not going to be able to stop me.
And Sarah, I suppose that's important because it means, A, Donald Trump has been subjected to the inevitable history lecture about all of those root causes. That may have an effect on his psychology and his viewpoint of the conflict. And also, Donald Trump has just sat there listening to Vladimir Putin making that case to the entire world. Lots of people in America will be tuning into the news tonight where you are and tomorrow morning, hearing Putin making that case, a case that they maybe don't hear very often.
Yeah, and it was clear that Donald Trump had listened to that at greater length during the meetings that they'd had behind closed doors. And then they came out to give these statements, and Donald Trump really happily ceded the floor to Vladimir Putin to go first. That's very, very unusual. Donald Trump likes to go first because he likes to emphasize that he's the most important man on the stage. But he happily gifted the floor to Vladimir Putin and listened to him talking about these root causes of the conflict. We know they've had this conversation before because sometimes when Donald Trump comes off the phone with Putin, he sounds really sympathetic towards this idea that there was good reason why Vladimir Putin had to invade Ukraine because he felt that there was a security threat on his borders. He does seem, when he has just heard these lectures from Putin, to become quite sympathetic to that point of view. And of course, that's the fear, isn't it, of European nations and most particularly of President Zelensky, that every time Donald Trump is in a room with Vladimir Putin, he becomes more sympathetic to Putin's case. Now, what they didn't do was discuss land swaps or territorial deals and end up, actually giving away any of Ukraine. But nonetheless, you could sort of see in the body language in the room that Donald Trump had been persuaded once again, for now anyway, of Putin's case on this.
So when President Trump said in that statement, so they had a 3-hour meeting, then there was a 12-minute period where they read out those statements to the press. President Trump said there were many, many points that we agreed on. Do we have any idea what they agreed on?
No.
No.
And then he also said that there was one very significant thing that they did not agree on. And he didn't tell us what that was either. And as soon as he had given his statement, Donald Trump headed into an interview with Fox News, where he sat down, and the presenter there asked him once again, what is this significant point of disagreement that you couldn't reach an agreement over? And he wouldn't tell him either. And I don't think it's as simple as just, we didn't get a ceasefire. I think it's probably the reason why they weren't able to agree a ceasefire. But precisely what it is that's holding this up, we don't know. But there was a very bizarre thing that Donald Trump then went on and said in that Fox News interview. He said, it's now up to President Zelensky to sort this out and to take this forward so that we can achieve a ceasefire. He didn't say what it is that Volodymyr Zelensky is supposed to do to move this forward, but once again we got that sense that Putin had very effectively made his case and said, the ball's in Zelensky's court, not mine. Get him to do something so that we can agree a ceasefire. Don't put it all on me. That was the idea that came out of the way Donald Trump was saying this. It's Zelensky now that needs to move.
Oh, so Sarah, just before the summit, the new lowered expectations version of what the summit was going to produce was a whole host of kind of like mini deals on maybe things like restoring flights between the US and Russia, which had stopped, or joint deals on minerals either in Alaska or in Russia or Ukraine. Did any of that happen at all?
There's no indication that they talked about that. We thought that they might raise nuclear weapons, that Putin might tempt Donald Trump with the idea that they could sign some kind of nuclear deal, and that would gild his reputation that he wants to build as a global peacemaker if they were reducing the number of nuclear weapons in the world. But there was no mention of any of that, so we don't know if it was discussed or not. But we were just left with this bizarre sense that Donald Trump, even though he had lowered expectations, as they'd said that this is not going to produce a peace deal in Ukraine, this meeting, he said really specifically on the way here, on Air Force One, he spoke to reporters and said that he wanted to achieve a ceasefire today, and if he didn't get that, he would not be happy. He said, I don't know if it's possible today, but that's what I want. I won't be happy if we don't get it. He really clearly didn't get it. And he didn't look unhappy. He was gazing rather benignly on Vladimir Putin as he was talking at this joint statement. And at the end of it all, Donald Trump said, I'm sure we're going to speak again very soon. We might even meet again very soon. And then Vladimir Putin had a rather cheeky reply.
Next time in Moscow, he said that in English. I thought Donald Trump looked positively charmed, enchanted by Vladimir Putin, and to me the sign of things to come was when they met on the tarmac before their meeting. Vladimir Putin was all smiles. He was doing his best to look pleased to see his friend Donald Trump again. It looked like they made jokes to each other. They nearly hugged, they shook hands, and then something really bizarre happened. So Vladimir Putin's limousine, the Aurus, of which Russia is really, really proud because it's Russian-made, was there on the tarmac. But Vladimir Putin got into the car with Donald Trump, into Donald Trump's The Beast, and that I think was a carefully calculated and prepared ploy. It's a charm offensive. If you want to make your, whoever you're negotiating with, you want to make them trust you, believe you, like you. This is what you do. That was him signaling to Donald Trump, look, I trust you, I like your car, let's travel together. And I thought at that moment, oh, I see where this is going, and I think that trick worked.
You don't climb into the Beast, of course, as the US president's limousine is known, without being invited. And for all that Putin did turn up clearly ready to charm him, Donald Trump looked ready to be charmed. I mean, he had rolled out a literal as well as a metaphorical red carpet for Vladimir Putin. As Putin was walking towards him, he was standing clapping his hands, sort of applauding him for arriving and looking absolutely delighted to see him, charmed, as you say. And it was fascinating that they got in the car together so they could have a conversation one-on-one, because we'd been told that it had been planned that they would have a formal one-on-one meeting once they got to the military base and they sat down together, just the two of them and their translators. But that plan got changed by someone, and there never was a point of this one-on-one tete-a-tete except for in the limo. And by the time they were sitting down for formal talks, there was a team of at least 3 on the American side and on the Russian side. So it was an opportunity, wasn't it, for them to do some business without their foreign affairs advisors listening in.
Do we have any idea why that change of format happened? Is that like the wiser people on Trump's team trying to hold him back so that he doesn't have that private moment where he can give stuff away? Do we think that's a product of the lobbying by the Europeans? Was one of their messages privately to Trump, don't get in a room with him by yourself? Or was it Trump himself thinking, actually, I don't want to be stuck in that room on my own with this guy, maybe because he didn't even trust himself?
Fascinating question, isn't it? I mean, if I was advising the White House, I wouldn't let Donald Trump get in a room on his own with Vladimir Putin, and I would try and insist that he had senior advisors there. But how you tell that to Donald Trump, I'm not entirely sure. The people he ended up with him were Steve Witkoff, who is the special envoy to Russia, who's been going back and forward and meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow and then relaying messages back to Trump, and the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. And that's very interesting because Rubio is much more hawkish on Russia than Donald Trump is. He has been much, much more critical of Vladimir Putin in the past, much more critical of the war in Ukraine. And he wants to get tougher with Russia than Donald Trump's instincts would be. So to put him in that room may have constrained Donald Trump to a certain extent, although, of course, by the time they emerged from that room, it wasn't entirely clear how constrained the president had been.
Do you remember the time during the first Trump presidency when people would speak of adults in the room, meaning advisors who knew Russia, who knew Ukraine, who could advise Donald Trump on how to deal with Russia? You don't get to hear that phrase that often anymore.
And there weren't that many people in this delegation who were Russia experts of any kind at all. Donald Trump brought with him his Treasury Secretary, his Commerce Secretary, the Defense Secretary turned up. But these aren't people who've got a long background in foreign affairs, let alone in Russian matters. But then, Vitaly, if you look at the people Putin brought with him, these people have been dealing with the West for a long time.
They know exactly what they were doing. So together with Putin in that room with Donald Trump, there was Sergei Lavrov, the long-time foreign minister of Russia, and Yuri Ushakov, President Putin's long-time foreign policy advisor. I mean, you'd struggle to find people who are more experienced in Russia in dealing with the United States.
The way you are describing this, it sounds like it's been incredibly successful for President Putin. He's back on the international stage with the leader of the most powerful nation in the world. Russia hasn't signed up to a ceasefire, let alone any details of any agreement. And there was no mention from Donald Trump of any severe consequences because Russia hasn't signed up to a ceasefire. I mean, it's 10 out of 10 for Moscow, isn't it?
I think there's very little doubt as to who the winners and losers are in this situation. For Vladimir Putin, he's back in from the cold. He got to meet the president of the most powerful country on earth, and Vladimir Putin's state ideology is based on this siege mentality, us versus them being the West, and America is the epitome of the West for Russia. It's the main enemy, if you like. So for him, this is about being seen as an equal, respected, feared maybe, and he got it.
But Donald Trump doesn't seem to see that he has lost anything within this. And this is what is so puzzling to try and work out. In that interview with Fox News he did straight after the joint statements, he was asked to mark the interview and he gave it 10 out of 10 as well. So he thinks that somehow he is winning. You have to wonder, he's on Air Force One now, flying back to Washington, whether he's reflecting on what he really got out of this and whether he won anything at all. This is the man who thinks he is the world's greatest deal maker, who can do a deal with anyone and always come out on top. But what has he walked away with here? It is very, very bizarre. Whereas he has given all this status to Vladimir Putin, he even said afterwards, he said, we are the number one and the number two countries in the world. Now, I don't think whether you're talking about defence, economy, whatever, anybody ranks Russia as number two. China, by any measure, is that. But there he is. He's even inflating Russia and Vladimir Putin's place on the world stage to flatter him at the point at which he's walked out of these talks with nothing to show for it at all.
And in terms of Ukraine and President Zelensky, Vitaly, what might be going through the minds of Mr. Zelensky and the people around him?
Well, standing here in Anchorage, I can almost hear sighs of relief from Volodymyr Zelensky's office. The worst thing that could have happened, i.e. being presented with a deal, which would mean handing territory over to Russia, that seems to have been avoided. But the big question now is, what next? What do we do? Donald, I mean, what do you want me to do? Because in the past week or so, Donald Trump criticized Volodymyr Zelensky, suggesting that, well, I think Donald Trump wants Volodymyr Zelensky to do exactly that, offer some territory to Russia in exchange for a deal. Clearly, this is not something that Volodymyr Zelensky will accept. Clearly, this is not something that the public in Ukraine will accept if you look at the most recent opinion polls. So it's a tricky situation for Zelensky, not least because of all the uncertainty and also Donald Trump's inability to get Vladimir Putin to stop attacking Ukraine.
Donald Trump left saying he is going to call some of the European leaders that he spoke to earlier this week about this. He said he'd be speaking to NATO and others as well. So it's possible, he may even be phoning them from Air Force One as we speak, that after some of those conversations have taken place, we may learn a little bit more about what it is that Vladimir Putin says he needs before he can agree to a ceasefire, and what it is that Donald Trump thinks that Zelensky needs to do in order to move closer to that. If we can discover what the sticking points are and therefore what Trump and Putin thought could get them over that, then maybe we will learn a little bit more about what the point of this has been.
Yeah, I suppose the conclusion I'm coming to is that this is just another step. And it sort of, because it was a summit and because it was a historic moment and because there was lots of drama and because at the start of the week Trump was making those slightly weird comments about land swaps, it felt like this was going to be a culmination of something. But yet again, it's just another step. And actually, you could argue it's not even a step forward because, as Vitaly said right at the start of this episode, actually nothing on the ground in Ukraine has changed. Nothing in the kind of big geopolitical forces that make up the conflict have changed either. What really gets me is, and okay, Steve Rosenberg, our Moscow editor, will laugh when I say this, is I think I see Putin in a slightly different way. So first of all, you see him on the red carpet and you're like, oh yeah, a couple of days ago, this guy was a total pariah. Now he's getting the red carpet treatment and the ride in the Beast. And okay, that psychologically makes you as a human being perceive him differently, just on a sort of subconscious level. Then sort of seeing it almost like a kind of like impish Putin emerging. So the bit where they're doing the gaggle with all the journalists shouting questions at the delegations, which of course happens every time Trump appears in public. But for Putin, he was sort of like laughing. He does this funny little sort of like impish grin about like, oh, is this how crazy you guys here? Obviously, there's a subtext there about there being not proper freedom of the press in Russia. And then just at the end, that little bit where he says, next time in Moscow, it's like, oh, actually, he speaks English really well. When do you ever hear Putin speaking in English and in a sort of like quite pally, matey way? And then you realize, oh yeah, that's what's happened here. Putin has now been rebranded, not as like supervillain of the world who invaded a sovereign country and led to like tens of thousands of his own people's deaths. He's now a player on the world stage who goes and joshes with Donald Trump. Rant over.
Sleek, it's the word that comes to mind, Adam. You'll know what I mean by that. He has just he's wormed his way into Donald Trump's good graces and played it very carefully. Now, you were talking about those opportunities when they were in front of the press and people were shouting questions loudly. It can't be very often that Vladimir Putin hears us. Not only were they shouting, are you going to agree to a ceasefire? They were shouting, when are you going to stop killing civilians in Ukraine, Mr. Putin? And that was the point at which he put his hand to his ear and sort of pretended that either he couldn't hear them or he couldn't understand them because the questions were being shouted in English. But yes, with a little sleek smile on his face as he was doing it, as though it's a joke to come to America and have people yelling at you about murdering civilians in Ukraine. Now, he was able to brush that off as terribly amusing. I mean, that tells you something about the mindset he arrived with, doesn't it?
And for non-Scottish colleagues, Victoria, sleek it. Do you know what sleek it means?
I absolutely don't. Sorry.
It's a great Scottish word. Appears in lots of Robert Burns poems.
Right. Like
we sleek it Cuireann Timorous Beastie. I've just double checked on the internet for the official definitions. It either means artful, flattering or ingratiating, or having a glossy skin or surface.
Okay, well, it is the perfect word. I mean, the way he was sort of smirking as that question was shouted at him, Vitaly, it's for many people across Ukraine, that will be absolutely disgusting, won't it?
Well, there's that, and also the way he referred to Ukrainians as a brotherly nation. That's mockery, basically. I was thinking before recording this, what have we learned today in Alaska? And I think very little. We've kept hearing about the summit being historic and potentially a turning point in the conflict. And you will know, Victoria, and Adam, you too, that I've been really skeptical about what was going to happen here in Anchorage, and I feel vindicated. And I take no pleasure in saying that I expected very little, and very little happened. We knew that Vladimir Putin is a really sleek operator. We knew how skilled he was as a KGB-trained operative. That trick with the limousine on the tarmac at the airbase, it was a masterclass in how to treat your opponents, and it worked. And the way he spoke English, he tailors the way he behaves, the way he speaks to his audience. He did it really well. And the fact that he's flying home with no concessions having been made, and Donald Trump is flying home with nothing gained, tells me that Vladimir Putin, well, got the upper hand in Anchorage.
There was one other masterstroke as well, I thought, from Putin. Donald Trump loves to say all the time, he's endlessly repeating, that the war in Ukraine is Joe Biden's war and that it's his fault because he somehow didn't prevent the invasion. And had Donald Trump been president, had he won the 2020 election, the invasion would never have happened. You hear that several times a week from Donald Trump. Well, Vladimir Putin agreed with him today. He said that is absolutely correct, that the invasion would not have occurred if Donald Trump had been the US president at the time. He didn't really explain it, but he said that, you know, Donald Trump is right about that. That is music to Donald Trump's ears. That will have made him very happy just to hear that phrase, even though he wasn't winning anything as a result.
And also postal voting.
Yes.
Donald Trump, when he was speaking to Fox News after the summit, he again was gushing with praise for Vladimir Putin, who apparently had told him during the summit that postal voting never works, it's not free and fair, which happens to be Donald Trump's opinion as well.
Very, very briefly, is there any chance of a future Putin-Zelensky summit?
I really don't think so. Vladimir Putin despises Zelensky. He clearly does not see him as a legitimate leader of Ukraine. He is keen to meet somebody like Donald Trump, who say, oh, you and me, we're the most important countries in the world. Let's sit down and decide the fate of other nations. Volodymyr Zelensky is everything Vladimir Putin isn't. So for him to sit down to Zelensky, what's the point? What's there to talk about? And when Volodymyr Zelensky says he's really keen to meet Vladimir Putin, well, that might work, but I'm not convinced that this is going to be the surefire way of ending this war.
That was what Donald Trump wanted the next step to be. Certainly, had he achieved an agreement for a ceasefire at this meeting, he said the next one would be him, Putin, and Zelensky. But it's pretty clear, you know, whatever leverage he might have thought he had that he can use against Putin to get him to do his will, he's not playing those cards. And so, no, it doesn't appear that he's in a position where he could persuade Putin to join him at a tripartite summit.
I've got two conclusions to end. That sounds very grand, doesn't it? It's early in the morning. It's when I'm at my grandest. Two conclusions. Number one, in a normal summit, right, the build-up really matters because that's when the pre-deals are being done that then get rubber stamped by the principals when they actually meet in the room. We all, as a media class, focus on the build-up to the summit. A bit like that was the case, and actually it wasn't. All the stuff beforehand was just chaff, speculation, because it was just what actually happened or didn't happen in the room in the end. And so that's a lesson for me about thinking about Donald Trump and things like this in the future. And second of all, this is one of those moments in like diplomacy and geopolitics where okay, nothing has actually happened, but a lot has happened.
Yeah. But as Vitaly said earlier, it doesn't, for Ukraine, it doesn't feel like we're further forward at all.
But it's not the worst case scenario where Trump signed up to lots of stuff that would have been hard to swallow.
This is true.
Sarah and Vitaly, thanks for all your hard work over the last 96 hours.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure to talk to you.
And Victoria, lovely to share the Newscast Ukrainecast studio with you in real time.
Yes, in the early hours of Saturday morning UK time. Should we go and get some breakfast?
Please, bacon sandwich for two.